Chapter 7, July. Oxtail soup. Ingredients: 2 oxtails, 1 onion, 2 cloves of garlic, 2 tomatoes, 1/4 kilo string beans, 2 potatoes, 4 chiles morritas. Preparation: cut up oxtails are placed in a pan to cook with a chunk of onion, a clove of garlic, salt and pepper to taste. It is advisable to add a little more water than you normally would, since you are making a soup. A good soup that's worth something has to be soupy without getting watery. Soups can cure any illness, whether physical or mental. At least, that was Chencha's firm belief, and Tita's too, although she hadn't given sufficient credit to it for quite some time. But now, it would have to be accepted as the truth. About 3 months ago, after tasting a spoonful of soup that Chencha had made and brought to Dr. John Brown's house, Tita had returned to her senses. She was at her high post in the window, looking through the glass at Alex, John's son, who was chasing doves on the patio. She heard John's footsteps coming up the stairs. She was eagerly awaiting his customary visit. John's words were her only link to the world. If only she could talk, tell him how much his presence and his conversation meant to her, and she could go down to Alex and kiss him like the son she didn't have, play with him until they were tired. If only she could remember how to cook so much as a couple of eggs, enjoy any kind of food. If only she could return to life. She noticed a smell that struck her, a smell that was foreign to this house. John opened the door and stood there with a tray in his hands, a bowl full of oxtail soup. Oxtail soup! She couldn't believe it. And behind John in came Chencha, covered in tears. The embrace they exchanged was brief, because they didn't want the soup to get cold. At the first sip, Nacha appeared there at her side, stroking her hair as she ate, as she had done when she was little and was sick, kissing her forehead over and over. There were all the times with Nacha, the childhood games in the kitchen, the trips to the market, the still warm tortillas, the colored apricot pits, the Christmas rolls, the smell of boiled milk, bread with cream, chocolate atole, cumin, garlic, onion. As always, throughout her life, with a whiff of onion, the tears began. She cried as she hadn't cried since she was born. How good it was to have a long talk with Nacha, just like old times when Nacha was still alive and they had so often made oxtail soup together. Chencha and Tita laughed, reliving those moments, and they cried, remembering the steps of the recipe. At last, Tita had been able to remember a recipe. Once she had remembered the first step, chopping the onion. The onion and garlic are chopped very fine and placed in a little oil to fry. As soon as they become transparent, the potatoes, beans, and chopped tomatoes are stirred in until the flavors meld. John interrupted these memories by bursting into the room, alarmed by the stream that was running down the stairs. When he realized it was just Tita's tears, John blessed Chencha and her oxtail soup for having accomplished what none of his medicines had been able to, making Tita weep. Sorry to have interrupted, he started to leave the room. Tita's voice stopped him, that melodious voice, had not spoken a word in 6 months. John, please don't leave. At Tita's side, John watched her go from tears to smiles as she heard all the news and gossip from Chencha. The doctor learned that Mama Elena had forbidden visits to Tita. In the De la Garza family, some things could be excused, but not disobedience, not questioning parental authority. Mama Elena would never forgive Tita, crazy or not, for blaming her for the death of Roberto. She had forbidden anyone to even mention Tita's name, just as she'd done with Gertrudis. Of course, Nicolas had returned early with news of Gertrudis. He had actually found her working in a brothel. He had delivered her clothes to her, and she had given him a letter for Tita. Chincha gave it to her, and Tita read it to herself. Dear Tita, you can't know how grateful I am that you sent me my clothes. Fortunately, I was still here to get them. Tomorrow I will be leaving this place, which is not where I belong. I still don't know where that is, but I know that I have to find the right place for myself somewhere. I ended up here because I felt an intense fire inside. The man who picked me up in the field, in effect, saved my life. I hope to meet him again someday. He left because I had exhausted his strength, though he hadn't managed to quench the fire inside me. Now, at last, after so many men have been with me, I feel a great relief. Perhaps someday I will return home and explain it to you. I love you, your sister Gertrudis. Tita put the letter in the pocket of her dress without a word. The fact that Chencha didn't ask her for anything about the contents of the letter was a clear sign she had already read it, beginning to end. Later, the three of them, Tita, Chencha, and John, dried the bathroom, the stairs, and the bottom floor. As they were saying goodbye, Tita told Chencha about her decision to never go back to the ranch again. She asked her to tell Mama Elena. Chencha crossed the bridge between Eagle Pass and Piedras Negros for the 100th time without even realizing it, as she tried to think of the best way to break the news to Mama Elena. The watchmen for both countries let her do it because they'd never known her since she was a child. Because they'd known her since she was a child. Pardon me. Besides, it was amusing to watch her go from one side to the other, talking to herself and chewing on her rebozo. She felt as if her talent for invention had been paralyzed by terror. Whatever version she gave, it was sure to infuriate Mama Elena. She had to invent one in which she, at least, got off scot-free. To manage that, she had to come up with an excuse that justified her visit with Tita. Mama Elena wouldn't swallow just anything, as if she didn't know it. She envied Tita for having the courage to refuse to go back to the ranch. She wished she could do the same, but she didn't dare. She'd heard talk since she was a child about the bad things that happen to women who disobey their parents and masters and leave the house. They end up in the filthy gutter of a fast life. Nervous, she twisted her rebozo around and around, trying to squeeze out the best of her lies for this situation. It never failed. When the rebozo was turned 100 times, a tale that fit the occasion always came to her. For her, lying was a survival skill that she had picked up as soon as she had arrived at the ranch. It was better to say that Father Ignacio had sent her to collect alms than to confess she had spilled the milk by chatting in the market. The judgment earned by the two stories was completely different. Anything could be true or false, depending on whether one believed it. For example, nothing she had imagined about Tita's fate had proved to be true. All these months she had been tormented thinking of the terrible things happening to Tita away from her kitchen, surrounded by lunatics screaming obscenities, confined in a straitjacket, eating God knows what awful food away from home. She imagined that the food in a lunatic asylum, a gringo one to boot, must be the most disgusting in the world, whereas in fact, she'd found Tita looking pretty good. She'd never set foot in a house. She'd clearly been treated well in the doctor's house, and she hadn't been fed too poorly since she looked to have put on a few pounds there. Still, no matter how much she had eaten, no one had given her anything like the oxtail soup. That's one thing you can be sure of, or else why would she have cried so hard when she ate it? Poor thing. Surely now that she had left, Tita would resume weeping, tortured by memories, the thought that she would never again cook alongside Chencha. Yes, surely she was suffering deeply. Chincha could never have pictured Tita as she was then, radiant, in a shiny, moire inlaid satin dress, dining by moonlight and listening to a declaration of love. That would have been too much for even Chincha's feverish imagination. Tita was sitting by a fire roasting a marshmallow. Beside her, John Brown was proposing marriage. Tita had agreed to accompany John under a half moon to a neighbor's ranch to celebrate the neighbor's discharge from military service. John had given her a beautiful dress he had bought for her in San Antonio, Texas, some time ago. Its multicolored fabric reminded her of the dove's plumage, the feathers around their necks, but without any sad associations with the distant day when she had shut herself in the dovecote. In fact, she felt completely recovered, ready to start a new life at John's side. They sealed their engagement with a gentle kiss on the lips. Tita didn't feel the same as when Pedro had kissed her, but she hoped in her spirit, which had been dampened for so long, would eventually be kindled by the presence of this wonderful man. Finally, after walking for 3 hours, Chencha had the answer. As always, she had come up with the right lie. She would tell Mama Elena that she'd been passing through Eagle Pass and seen a beggar on the street corner, dressed in filthy, tattered clothes. Moved by pity, she had gone over to give her coin and had been shocked at the discovery that the beggar was Tita. She had escaped from the lunatic asylum and was roaming the world to pay for the crime of having insulted her mother. Chincha had invited her back to come back home, but Tita had refused. She didn't feel she deserved to return to live with such a good mother, and she had asked Chencha to please tell her mother she loved her dearly and would never forget how much she had always done for her. And she promised that as soon as she became an honest woman, she would return to be with her mother and give her all the love and respect that Mama Elena deserved. Chincha figured this lie would cover her with glory, but unfortunately, she wasn't able to tell it. That night, when she got to the house, a group of bandits attacked the ranch. They raped Chincha. She was in no condition to hear this type of news, nor was Chincha in any condition to give it. It was a good thing she hadn't said anything, because when Tita returned to the ranch after hearing about their calamity, Chincha's pious lie would have been shattered by Tita's splendid beauty and radiant energy. Her mother received her in silence. For the first time, Tita held her gaze, and Mama Elena, for the first time, Tita firmly held her gaze, and Mama Elena lowered hers. There was a strange light in Tita's eyes. Mama Elena had disowned her daughter. Without any words, they made their mutual reproaches and thereby severed the strong tie of blood and obedience that had always bound them together, but could never be reestablished. Tita knew perfectly well that her mother felt profoundly humiliated because, Not only did she have to allow Tita back into her home again, but until she recovered, she needed Tita to take care of her. For that reason, Tita wanted with all her heart to give her the best possible care. She prepared her mother's meal very carefully, and especially the oxtail soup, with the good intention of serving it to her so that she would recover completely. Right, we are going to stop here and we will read the rest of the chapter together in class. This is kind of a long chapter, and a lot happens, as you will see. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your reactions and seeing your answers to the questions that are embedded into this video.